Hi everyone, welcome back to Japanese Politics 101. In this segment, we talk about separate components that make up Japanese politics, the Japanese political machine, so that you can look at that and study it and put it into the complexion of what makes up Japanese politics and why we talk about it. Today, Michael, we're going to talk about Komeito. This is probably our 10th segment on Japanese politics going down a hierarchy. Komeito is a very powerful force in understanding how Japanese politics works.
Komeito is probably the least understood and probably is the most important part of Japanese politics, at least on the national level. But it also is a major force in every major municipal area. The Komeito Party is ostensibly an independent party with its own administration, with its own ideology, its own ethics, own website. But it is well known that it is basically an organization that is the political arm for a single large congregation of Nichiren Buddhists called the Soka Gakkai.
Right.
Virtually everyone who is a Soka Gakkai member votes for the Komeito, and virtually everyone who votes for the Komeito is a Soka Gakkai member. There's a little bit of leeway on both sides that is somehow worked out, but by and by, those two are identical. And the thing is about the Soka Gakkai is that it's a religious organization, a religious corporation incorporated here in Tokyo with its headquarters up in Hachioji. And in fact, there is a phrase in Japanese political life, he's going to Hachioji, which means he's going to talk to the Soka Gakkai. That they have combined politics and religion to an extent that for a long time made them the arch enemies of the LDP, and in many ways of very many liberal thinkers, people who believe that religion and politics should be
church and state
should be separated.
Right.
This is a party that was founded basically as the way that this particular religion could have immense leverage on local affairs, first of all, and now, because it's in a coalition, on national affairs.
Right. You look at their policy platform, and it is very compelling. It's kind, it's gentle,
it's a social welfare program, yeah.
Right. And so I think it's very attractive to a lot of people who think Japan has really gone too far this way. It's too much towards, working hard and building the economy, and, children and mothers, they take the back seat, and we're just it's a backlash against that, and I think it's a very compelling platform if you take the chance to read it.
It's a very compelling platform. Very few people read it because the Komeito is so identified with this single religious sect that it is seen to be, by persons who are outside of the religious community, to be you're simply helping them, and that's true. That one of the primary functions of the Komeito is to protect the Soka Gakkai. That is why, for the Komeito, the most important election is not the national elections. They're not the Diet elections. It's the Tokyo Assembly elections.
Right.
And that there is a block of Komeito who are elected, and also they are in allegiance with the most powerful group within the Tokyo City Assembly. And that was a really interesting situation involving Koike Yuriko a few years back, where she came to power with the help of the Komeito and then came to dominate the legislature of Tokyo with their cooperation, even though on the national level, the Komeito cooperates strongly with the LDP, that they are very, very concerned about the protection of the religious corporation status of the Soka Gakkai. Because Soka Gakkai is seen as a heretic sect. The other Nichiren Buddhist sects, in fact, have excommunicated it from their overall umbrella organization.
Because they're stealing from, all of the people that would normally be members.
And when we're talking about people, we're talking about a huge number of dedicated voters. Approximately 8 million members, and most of them are adults. So you can basically count upon 7 million, 8 million sure votes every national election. There is no group that votes, except possibly some parts of the Communist Party electorate, that vote as consistently and indeed religiously as the Komeito does. And you can look at all kinds of studies. They vote in such a way that is obviously and clearly directed from above.
Right.
There, I have a graph I call the ski jump, which shows that in an utterly pointless exercise in the House of Councilors proportional vote, they actually choose, they have the chosen candidates. They may have 20 candidates, but they choose 7, and they tell the followers, vote for these 7 and nobody else, and that's exactly the way the graph turns out, as if every single voter was being watched by Big Brother.
Right.
They have this capacity, and that has made them, for the LDP, an utterly important prize.
Right.
And it was not the LDP that first identified them as a great prize. The person who first identified them as something to be brought in and to be held close.
The famous
Ozawa Ichiro.
Yes.
Who found in them the way, first of all, to topple the LDP in '93, and then in the next House of Councilors election, he created a party for the specific purpose to take his LDP rebels, a few assorted independents, and then put that together with the Komeito in an institution called the Shinshinto. And the LDP lost in a national election for the first time to a single party, which was the Shinshinto. That demonstrated that this group of religious voters was something that the LDP had to deal with.
Right.
But up until that time, they had been the enemy, particularly because the LDP used those other Nichiren Buddhist groups, the Risho Koseikai, the Reiyu-kai, as its ground forces, and there were many investigations of the Komeito as some kind of basically fraudulent organization, defrauding people of their wealth, telling them false doctrines, etc.
And also manipulating the election laws.
Yes,
right.
and in fact, the leader of the Soka Gakkai, Ikeda Daisaku, had indeed been put in prison because of violations of the electoral law.
In Osaka, long time ago, 60s.
Long time ago, but it's never, that has never left their minds. The Komeito has its origins as a study group that existed in the pre-war era. And this study group, this Buddhist lay study group, became incredibly powerful after the war. But it has in its institutional memory not only the oppression and incarceration of the leader, the current leader, whom nobody sees and who is immensely old, if he's still alive at all. No one really is sure. No one ever sees him. But that the original leaders of the study group were imprisoned themselves and died in prison under the imperial laws as a subversive group. They are incredibly sensitive to that story and that possibility the government can turn against them. And so they have become, under Ikeda Daisaku, after his own imprisonment, the party that seeks out and finds the power and allies itself with it.
It's a morphine organization, kind of, isn't it? It holds true to its principles, but it morphs. It's flexible.
It's flexible in terms of power, and it saw in Ozawa Ichiro in the 1990s the guy who could get them and keep them safe.
Right.
And he, in fact, created a party for them.
Right.
That party broke up. The Komeito re-emerged, called itself the New Komeito, and you'll see some texts that still refer to it as the New Komeito. It's just the same organization. But now, at the end of the millennium, the LDP at that time, which had been constantly on the Komeito's case, switched sides and saw what Ozawa Ichiro saw in them.
You're looking pretty good to me.
Yeah, 8 million sure votes.
Yes.
And they set up a quid pro quo. And the quid pro quo is, Komeito votes for its own candidates in the proportional party list. In return, it will vote for the candidates of the LDP in the districts.
Right.
Because the Komeito has virtually no capacity to win a district seat on its own. So it makes this deal, and it's an incredibly profitable deal both for the LDP and the Komeito.
What's the tip for the tat? The LDP gets a coalition of sorts. They are able to dominate in the lower house and the upper house. What does Komeito get as a consequence of that?
It's two things. One, it gets protection for the entire organization, the mothership, the Soka Gakkai.
We'll leave you alone.
We'll leave you alone. The second one is that they do have tremendous leverage, depending on how they performed in the last election, the previous election, how much they can change policy to be more humanistic, less authoritarian, to appeal to their own
seat at the table,
their own vote,
right.
Their own base. Now, the Komeito, I mean, we could spend hours and hours going into the intricacies. The Komeito is a very interesting organization in that it's largely male-dominated.
And they tithe, don't they?
They tithe, but that's the Soka Gakkai. We have to keep those two separate. At least they want us to. But the Komeito is largely a guy party. They have women, but they're never major parts of the leadership. The thing is that the mirror, the Soka Gakkai, is heavily controlled by women.
Yes.
In fact, the most powerful part of the Soka Gakkai organization is the Fujinbu.
Women and children.
The women's association, the married women's association. Not the single men, not the single women, not the men's part, the married women's division. And inside Soka Gakkai temples, the only division that gets an office is the Fujinbu. Always. And everybody knows that they go into the office, what the married women decide, how it's decided, men don't know, the single people don't know, but out comes the policy.
Right.
And the men of Komeito have to go to the Fujinbu and explain what is it, that question, what we're getting out of the relationship with the LDP. And the two of them, then the two sides negotiate, well, this is what we have to ask in return. So it's a fascinating male-female relationship that exists within the two organizations.
This chemical reaction is likely to come to the fore as we revise the Constitution, or as we talk about the revision of the Constitution that requires 2/3 in the lower house, 2/3 in the upper house, and a 51% referendum.
Yeah, it's very important actually in the houses, because the LDP really, it absolutely needs them, the votes of the Komeito, in the upper house. So whatever the constitutional referendum amendment is, it has to be acceptable to this mysterious married women's association within the Soka Gakkai.
Right.
And it has had effects in the past. When Abe and his group of radical reformers came into power in 2006, they wanted to change the education law. And they made it highly patriotic, highly authoritarian, with a top-down focus, and brought the bill to the Komeito, and the Komeito brought it to the Fujinbu, and they just
lots of water. Lots
of very ice-cold water on it, and they revised the life out of it. And eventually, that newly revised bill, basically rewritten by the Komeito, was what was passed. They have had that effect in the past, and they will have the effect in the future.
So wrapping this up, Michael, is there any kind of combination that you can come up with where the LDP feels emboldened enough to say, thank you, Komeito, we're good on our own?
Not a chance in hell, because in some of the districts, 25% of the votes that an LDP member gets, or even more, come from Komeito voters. Would you throw away 25% of your votes when you're winning by a few thousand?
Right.
Obviously not. So while there's always talk about that,
right.
You know, hey, Komeito is a Buddhist pacifist group, that they're into social welfare, they're not into this great power politics. At the end of the day, the LDP takes its breath and says, whatever they want.
Right.
And that's what happens.
So in effect, they play somewhat of a mollifying effect on certain issues.
Always.
The Komeito Party is small in numbers, but critical to the LDP complexion of dominating the upper house and the lower house. Please stay tuned. We're going to continue to explore this.